more can join as they come, I can introduce and just begin the session then. All right. Greetings, everyone, and a warm welcome to the third session of the Chicago School of Thought, hosted by the University of Chicago Center in Delhi. The UChicago Center in Delhi is part of the 6 global centers of the University of Chicago. The center facilitates and supports international academic and research collaborations between the University of Chicago and academics in India. In addition to faculty-to-faculty collaborations, we also support research initiatives and engagements with current students as well as alumni of the university. This session marks the third session of our new and ongoing workshop series on emerging research methodologies in the social sciences and humanities. The series is part of our broader commitment to fostering global academic collaboration and dialogue, and will feature conversations between scholars from India and the United States, highlighting innovative and interdisciplinary approaches to research in the social sciences and humanities. If you want to tune in to one of our previous sessions on research methodologies in political science and social work, the recorded sessions are available both on our website and our YouTube channel. In today's session, we are thrilled to feature a conversation that brings together distinguished voices in the field of linguistics. Please join me in welcoming Professor Anastasia Ginakidou. Dr. Anastasia is a professor of linguistics and the college at the University of Chicago. She studied classical philology and linguistics at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in Greece and received her PhD in linguistics from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. She is one of the founders and the director of the newly established Hellenic Studies Center at the University of Chicago. She is also a co-director of the Center for Gesture, Sign, and Language, and a collaborator in the Bilingualism Matters initiatives in Chicago. Her main interests are on linguistic meaning, the relation between meaning and form, and how language is used to convey subjectivity, including ideology. Her main language of study is modern Greek, and she has done comparative work on German, Dutch, Spanish, Basque, Korean, and Mandarin Chinese, and has worked on diachronic syntax and semantics. She is the author of numerous articles and books, including Polarity, Sensitivity as Non-Veridical Dependency, Definiteness and Nominalization, Mood, and Mood, Tense, and Aspect Revisited. Professor Ginakidou is also recently finished a book titled Truth and Veridicality in Grammar and Thought with the University of Chicago Press, and her new book titled Modal Sentences, co-authored with Alda Marie, will appear in early 2026 with the Cambridge University Press. To be in conversation with Professor Anastasia, please join me in welcoming a renowned Indian linguist and our very own UChicago alumnus, Professor Teesta Bagchi. Professor Bagchi has been Chair Professor of Theoretical Linguistics in the Department of Linguistics at the University of Delhi, where she taught full-time from 1994 to 2019, was Head of Department in Spells, and advised MPhil degree and doctoral students up to 2023. She received a PhD in linguistics with honors at the University of Chicago, a former visiting scientist with the Linguist Research Unit at the Indian Statistical Institute, where she has later been a member of the Technical Advisory Committee. She has also been the Robert F. and Margaret S. Goheen Fellow during 2001 to 2002 at the National Humanities Research Center, Triangle Park in North Carolina. A member of the Indian Council of Social Science Research and the ICSSR's representative member at the Indian Council of Philosophical Research, she has served as an advisory linguist member at the Adivasi Academy dedicated to tribals, and as a member of the academic councils of key central universities across India. During 2010 to 2012, she was CSIR Mobility Scientist on Deputation at NISTADS, Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, New Delhi, a life member of the Linguistic Society of India and an associate member of the Linguistic Society of America. Her publications include The Sentence in Language and Cognition, Lexington Books, Roman and Littlefield, the co-edited volume Pragmatics and Autolexical Grammar in honor of Jerry Sadok, with Ezio Yuasa and Catherine Beals, from John Benjamin's, annotated English translations of key Bangla texts, and numerous articles in various volumes of journals. Without further ado, let's welcome our speakers for an evening of very insightful discussions. Over to you both.
Thank you very much, Jibakshi, for this very kind introduction to both of us. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be initiating this dialogue on aspects of research methods in linguistics with Professor Anastasia Giannakidou, who, if I may just add, is the Frank J. McLaurin Professor of Linguistics in the Department of Linguistics and the College at the University of Chicago. It's a real honor to have you with us today, Anastasia. So if I may start with a question to be put to you. This is a question that concerns the wider understanding of linguistics in several other fields in the social sciences and humanities. And this question is whether it is coterminous with the term semiotics, which, excuse me, there's something, yeah. Semiotics, where there is a rather deep methodological issue involved, which I feel is involved. The methods of inquiry and analysis in semiotics are typically rather distinct from those involved in more technical modes of inquiry into language per se, that have come to form the discipline of linguistics. Even if there may be, and in fact there are, specific areas of overlap between the two. As I came to realize as a teacher of introductory linguistics and basic semantics myself to many generations of students at the University of Delhi. What would be your own perspective on this matter? I bring this up because, in many other social science disciplines, there seems to be a conflation of semiotics and linguistics, in their understanding of the two domains. So would you care to respond to this, please?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tista. Let me also say how fortunate and happy and honored I am to participate in this discussion and to have received this invitation. Tista is a longtime friend, and it's wonderful to be able to do this. And thank you to Jubakshi and to Lenny for organizing and taking care of the logistics. A big hello from a cold Chicago to our audience as well. And yes, sure, we can get started. I think this is a very rich question, Tista, and it really touches upon, I think, the dual nature of linguistics being both part of humanistic study, as it studies something that is very deeply and essentially human, language, and at the same time uses methodology that belongs to both the humanities and the social sciences, and specifically semiotics is part of that methodology. Certainly, semiotics is how linguistics was birthed. Okay, it was it came out linguistics as a paradigm, the way we know it. And again, I don't want to do like a large historical survey, but it needs to be understood that while the study of language has existed for thousands of years, and Indian grammarians, Panini and so forth, ancient Greek and Byzantine grammarians were very preoccupied with the study of language. And indeed, in very systematic way, creating taxonomies, creating methods for understanding grammar and translating and understanding Sanskrit. I think it was no accident that the study of grammar, develops in these two traditions, because we did engage with older forms of the language and had to develop systematic ways of analyzing it. So we did have systematic methods for analyzing language before the emergence of linguistics. Linguistics, as we know it, does emerge in Europe in the late 19th, early 20th century through the science of semiotics, specifically the way Ferdinand de Saussure understood it. Or, Peirce also, Charles Sanders Peirce, the great American philosopher, also had similar ideas in the, again, late 19th, early 20th century, that language is a system. It is a system of signs. So the word semiotics comes from the Greek semeion, which means sign. And so we have this view of language as being a system of signs. Signs are of three kinds. We have the iconic sign, we have the index sign, and then we have the symbolic sign, which is, it connects a form with a meaning in a kind of arbitrary and conventional way. So the insight from semiotics is precisely that everything that is a sign, and again, semiotics studies various kinds of signs, including images, including actions. In anthropology, for example, the concept of sign becomes broader. It is a set of cultural practices. In sociology, again, it's a set of, number of human behaviors. So the concept of a sign is quite broader than what we mean by linguistic sign. And that's why we have semiotics applied to a number of fields. If we think of the linguistic sign, we think of it in terms of meaning and form. The form is what we hear, what is articulated via the articulatory organs that we have. And meaning is the thing that we don't see. It's a kind of conceptual construct that is associated with that sign. And that association is conventional, since most linguistic signs are symbols, they are symbolic, and they don't bear an essential relation to the actual meaning that they convey, apart from things that are, closer to the sound, like onomatopoeia, but or more iconic symbols. I think there is less convention when we have iconicity in modern sign languages. So when we look at sign languages, we do find more iconic signs. And so we should maybe water down the idea that it's just convention. And I should also mention here that, again, ancient Greeks engaged. There's this famous dialogue by Plato, Cratylus, where Socrates engages with Hermogenes, who expresses this purely conventional idea, and Socrates argues for a more essential idea between a relation between the sign, the form, and the meaning. So that idea that language is, a system of signs, that it is a system, so there is a logic, the logic of the system, and that signs have a place within the system, has been very influential. And as I said, it determined European linguistics, and it determined linguistics analysis for a long time as the analysis became more structuralist. So structuralism and semiotics have a very strong relation as tools of analysis. Certainly, this method continues in social sciences, especially in fields like anthropology, for example, where we look at the logic of the system. But in linguistics, it evolved, and we developed methodologies that go beyond just the logic of the system. For example, Chomsky's syntactic structures became very revolutionary in the way we understand how syntax and syntactic relations work. And linguistics became highly empirical. As I said, semiotics can sometimes be a little more, I will use the word esoteric, in the sense that it looks at the logic of the system, and in certain forms, like in structuralism and even post-structuralism, like in the French school, Lacan and Foucault and the rest, it takes the logic of, it is just the framework of the system. It is how everything, signs have places in the system. I got a little message there. How signs have a place in the system. And sometimes that excludes the empirical aspect or anaphoricity to the world. I think many fields in linguistic theory are highly empirical. So we look at the data. We look in syntax, for example, at our intuitions about the data. Or we look at phonology, like phonology. Modern day phonology has become highly empirical. We look at, what people produce, what people comprehend, and, whether we're going to have correct theories or not is going to be gauged against that that empirical reality. And of course, linguistic methodology expanded, to include even more empirical studies with experimental linguistics, with computational linguistics, with in the field of semantics, which is my own field, we definitely look at, anaphoricity to truth. So, most linguistic semantic theories since antiquity, since Aristotle, we do have truth being the relation. So meaning is a relation between language, a linguistic form, and a concept, which is a generalization based on what is actually true in the world. So in order to be able to understand the meaning of a sentence, it is raining right now, we need to have some context. I think we'll come back to the notion of context. And then, whether that sentence is true is we understand what the words mean, how they're put together, and then we know what conditions in the world would have to be such that the sentence would be true under those conditions. And we can actually verify by, following a process of proof. We can look out the window, we can see, is it raining or not? And then we can understand what the sentence actually means by being able to say whether that sentence is true or not, given certain circumstances. Yeah. So then broadly speaking, I would say that linguistics does remain as part of the semiotics tradition, in the sense that we still think of language as a system. We still think of it as having the logic of the relation between meaning and form in a systematic way, but we branched out in terms of methodology to various other fields that are more empirical, and therefore I think give us a better, a more rich and multidimensional understanding of what the object of analysis is, and therefore, more multidimensional analysis at the various branches. Yeah. I don't know if that was too much, but we can take up, okay.
It's really a wonderful sort of, kind of zooming in on the field of linguistics, keeping the umbrella of semiotics, that tradition in perspective that you have provided. So
yes,
thank you very much for that. And since you mentioned ancient Indian grammatical, analysis and argumentation, it turns out that there are also very interesting debates in ancient, into medieval, Indian, primarily Sanskrit grammarians and philosophers of language who have tried to bring perspectives of meaning and interpretation into issues of word meaning versus sentence meaning. So trying to sort of relate meaning and grammar, even aside from Panini, there have been people like Bhartrihari, who is 5th to 7th century, roughly, philosopher of language, who, speculates a lot, bringing in grammatical categories into his discourse in regard to, cognition of language.
Wow.
He says something about how a child might start producing language, without necessarily bringing in or necessarily having had the access to modern technology that linguists have. It's quite remarkable, actually. His explorations into meaning and form in language. And there has been a very rich tradition of argumentation subsequently also into sort of early modern times, in fact, through various grammarians and philosophers, especially of the Nyaya Vaisheshika school of philosophy, who have especially gone into issues of, anomalies of meaning, such as what, how does one parse an expression like Bandhyaputra, a barren woman's son, which is contradictory in terms. I mean, just one example. So I think there is room for, a great deal of dialogic exchange further on such issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for
Um,
bringing this up. I'm not surprised in a way to hear that, because India has a lot, as I said, like having the tradition of Sanskrit and a long, written record of works. You
Right.
expect thinking intellectuals to engage with, that body of work, but not just in terms of content, but also in terms of comparing with current forms of language at each given time. And so that raises, inevitable questions. And I think it's important to point out that, as opposed to very Western models, so like the way semiotics and structuralism merge in Europe, for example, or in the United States of America, where we have a great tradition, Charles Sanders Peirce, then Boas, Sapir. I mean, the semiotics really births American linguistics as well.
Right.
These traditions are traditions that are very modern, they emerge with modernity. But in India or in Greece, you have engagement that goes beyond modernity, way back. And therefore, any modern theorizing does engage with, these older forms of thinking. And there's a lot of important insight. Like you're telling me that they wonder about language acquisition. And this is, a very modern problem in the eyes of someone that works in, the more current Western traditions.
Right.
But in fact, questions about the nature of knowledge, therefore also linguistic knowledge, it is not unexpected to have them going back.
Right.
And I'm very glad you brought this up. I think Noam Chomsky also, when he formulates the innateness hypothesis about human language, he accepts that when we ask this question, and this is one of the important theses of modern linguistics, that we humans are endowed with language. And so when we ask the question of acquisition, we're saying, how is that knowledge being activated, and guides language learning, in young children whose brain is otherwise quite immature and other cognitive processes are not very mature either. And when we answer that question, we inevitably go to the innateness that, there is some kind of linguistic endowment, which is very close, as Chomsky himself acknowledges, to he calls it a Menos problem. It's from the Platonic dialogue Meno, where the theory of Socrates is developed, Platonic theory apparently, of recollection, that any kind of knowing, therefore also linguistic knowing, is a recollection of older knowledge that has been there in Plato, since we have all, encountered at some point in previous lives the ideas, the forms. So we come from that realm. Therefore, we did know that. So it's a kind of passive knowledge that gets activated. And we find this idea also in Kant, when in his critique of pure reason, he says, like, there are principles that guide learning. And those principles, are principles of human cognition that have been there. Yeah, so there is a kind of unity that sometimes is artificially perceived or separate because of modernity. But I think, some of the questions that we address and the way we address them are quite old in
Indeed. Well,
yes,
I'd
their
like
pedigree.
to, right, indeed. Well, I'd like to mention here that what I said about the Indian grammatical and philosophical traditions, I have learned from a late scholar, Professor Bimal Krishna Motilal, who wrote a book called The Word and the World, India's contributions to the study of language. And he unfortunately passed away at a relatively young age. He was at Oxford when he passed away, actually.
Oh, that is so sad.
And work done by a senior Sanskritist with whom I've been doing a little bit of modest work on quantification in Sanskrit, Professor Vijaya Goswami of Jadavpur University, Kolkata, who's very active still in Sanskrit studies, who has written this lovely book called Meaning and Interpretation in Ancient India, where she also brings in, the debates on syntax and meaning in her book.
Well, here we got a theme for a workshop, dear Tista. You know, this is actually very, yeah, I think it's very, very important to be able to bring these frameworks together and just show that, you know, these kinds of questions are really deep and they can be very, very, really deep. And they guide linguistic analysis, you know, as we know it, and not just linguistic analysis, the way everything becomes interdisciplinary now. And I think it is also within the logic of semiotics and, you know, like language being a system. Language is multifaceted. There are so many aspects. It's a system. It's a grammatical system. It's a meaning system. It is a system of behavior. It is a cultural system. There are so many aspects. So, you know, we need interdisciplinarity has added to the textures that we have in individual analysis. And I think it has also added to the idea that, you know, you can no longer just have pure analysis, like, okay, and I'm going to do now purely morphological analysis or purely syntactic analysis or purely semantic pragmatic analysis. I think we understand now a complementarity about of these approaches, and that, you know, in order to be able to have a better and more comprehensive and deep theories, you need to approach the analysis through these various perspectives. I think that's, yeah.
Okay, indeed. Well, you've actually answered a question that I was going to raise about linguistic data already. So, you know, I'd like to.
We can always talk more about linguistic data. There are so many and of so many different kinds. You know,
absolutely.
Logical data, syntax data.
That's right.
I did want to say about data that, like, one of the things, and as we said at the beginning, like linguistics is so empirical. I think linguistics is one of those sciences that really are very solid and good with the data in terms of we basically study, you know, language, what we produce. We do have textual analysis and discourse analysis, and we do have later developments that look at corpora, and maybe we can talk about them later. But when we talk about like linguistic production, we talk about speech, and we have a good understanding of, you know, meaning with our intuitions as guide. Okay, so I think linguistics, you know, we often talk nowadays about experimental linguistics, and we do have a lot of experiments, and we can talk more about that too. But I think the largest experiment we have is our own intuition. And as we study our languages and as we consult native speakers of the languages, and we get like pretty solid sense of the data, those data and intuition is very highly replicable. Okay, and it's very important to point out, because when we look at other areas of experimental, like, you know, psychology, for instance, there is an issue of replicability in the data, but with our own intuitions, there's a lot of recent work. I should mention here the work of John Sprouse, who is actually an American linguist working in Abu Dhabi right now. He was at NYU and the University of Connecticut. He did a meta-study of a number of works that describe syntactic competence of speakers based on purely like intuition-based data, and compare them to magnitude estimation tasks where you just have like open-ended judgments. And he found that the intuition-based works capture they're very consistent. They give very consistently, you know, same results, and are very reliable guides of linguistic intuition. So I wanted to say that, like, you know, in our basic methodology and in consulting our intuitions, we get very good sense of what the linguistic data are. And then, of course, with corpora, we have now a new set of data that come with their own logic. And I currently have two students working with me on one is working on Twitter. So we're looking at online discourses. The other one is working on Reddit, trying to distinguish between knowledge-based and opinion-based corpora, and try to find generalizations and that lead us to properties that characterize each discourse. And I think it's extremely interesting to look at those data. I mean, in the old days, we had this field that was called discourse analysis, and
Indeed.
it was good, but I think now with the new methodologies and with the ability to look at large scale corpora, we can have also very good views of how people use language, and you can do great work on pragmatics in this field, and rhetorical tropes and persuasion. It's a great field for us, dear Tista, like semantics and pragmatics and more philosophy of language minded linguists. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Well, you know, that's really a wonderful set of facts and perspectives that you've brought in, Anastasia, at this point. To some extent, that relates to the next question, the next point, rather, that I'd like to raise, which is that there are distinctive research methods in linguistics that require the discipline to be poised at a conjunction of the sciences, you know, including, but not at all confined to aspects of mathematical logic on the one hand, psychology, with cognitive psychology, which you have already brought up, and relatedly cognitive neuroscience, from which, in fact, you know, experimental research issues are being, you know, brought to the fore. It's a very, from what I understand, it's a very lively area of work. You know, John Sprouse's work probably sort of fits in that broader sort of scientific experimental work, you know, at the junction of linguistics and cognitive neuroscience. So, you know, while linguistics has this humanistic and social science outreach, there is this scientific set of methods that come in. What is your take on all of this? Does this pose a problem, or do you think that they can be balanced, the two sides?
Yeah, this is a great question, very much, you know, definitional of what we do. I think that it adds to the richness of our analysis. Definitely, you know, like, you know, the data become richer, and the approaches for the analysis become richer. At the beginning, as you said, linguistics, especially like in the Chomskyan tradition, but even before that, we have like, you know, Tarski in the before the 50s, like 20s and 30s, the Polish mathematicians. We have a strong tradition of grammar that views, that is very rigorous and very formal, and views linguistics as a branch of mathematics. I think, you know,
Frege, Bertrand Russell, sorry to interrupt. Frege.
Oh, please, no problem. Interrupt me anytime, yes.
Well,
yes.
Gottlob Frege, Bertrand Russell.
Exactly, Gottlob Frege, like, exactly. We do have this very Russell, like they all emerge at the beginning of the 20th century. Linguistics is viewed, or at least the study of meaning, as some kind of mathematical project and, you know, formalization. And again, although, and that's maybe where the older systems, like, you know, the Indian systems or the Aristotelian system, for example, is not formalized. So formalism comes, at least Aristotle is not formalized. It's so hard to read some of his modal logic and the negation, because it is all, I mean, medieval grammarians constructed the square of opposition, and they did try to systematize. I mean, it was systematic, it was just not formal.
Right.
So formalism has been an important progress, and certainly made the study of language and meaning like very serious and part of you know, larger philosophical projects. The concept of truth again becomes central, truth, model theoretic truth, conditional semantics, and I think that is still the way we think of semantic study. Like we still think in terms of like principled formal theories. There are no non-formal theories of meaning as well, such as like cognitive semantics. But even there, you have some kind of systematization and something that looks like, formal frameworks. Now, Chomsky comes and says linguistics is branch of psychology. So you have like, this is a very different perspective where you put it now in the social sciences, you emphasize the empirical aspect. Wittgenstein already, and Grice and a number of other philosophers come, and they come from more from the ordinary language approach. Grice in the 70s writes his very famous paper, Logic and Conversation, where he raises the question of implicature, like a lot of meaning is produced, not, by what is said, but by the unsaid, to use the word of Larry Horn, an American linguist and philosopher friend of our dear Jerry Sadok. Like they are thinking, Jerry Sadok himself also had important contributions in the implicature. And so the whole idea about implication is that there's all this meaning that is not logical inference, it's not entailment, but it is present there and is derived by the conversation, the logic of the conversation. So formalism was important, but we do acknowledge nowadays that there are aspects of meaning that, enrich it and that are not necessarily fully predictable by what is asserted. And then we have, more recent things that like expressive meaning, for example, that is also part of that, the kind of stuff that Chris Potts developed. This is not to say that there is no systematicity in how these kinds of non-entailment based inferences are produced. But it is also to say that the enterprise of viewing language as a purely mathematical object cannot be true. So there's much more into, and although maybe the logic of the grammar is mathematical, and again, with Chomsky, we do have this rigorous syntax with the syntactic trees, the transformations, with minimalist syntax nowadays, another revolution. In 1995, I think the minimalist program appears. We do have, again, a number of operations that are kind of universal and finite in number, but, very general in scope. We do have the attempt to formalize, and so that still guides us, as the theory of grammar needs to have a formalization, a rigor that still is reminiscent of these former days. But again, the concept is that grammar is not just this formal system. Grammar is a system that children learn, and it relates to other aspects. Like in phonology, for example, we've had a revolution, like, in terms of, what exactly is the sounds that we perceive as phonemes. There is a lot of the phonological analysis that we do nowadays is very different from the phonological analysis that was done earlier on, with the emergence of like experimental methods that give us now a different sense of the abstract structure of sounds. Are there categorical differences between sounds? I think my colleagues nowadays don't even understand categorical differences. It's, it's very hard to understand what, the phonemic values were that we learned as students in our earlier years. So there is a revolution that goes beyond the mere mathematical, more like within into the empirical. And of course, with neuroscience and neuroimaging, there was also a large numerous studies that did fMRIs. We had magnetic, like we did a lot of work that had to do with like how we can extract information from the brain about processing, for instance. And I did some work myself in with neuroimaging and brain imaging technique, EEGs. But I think what came out of that was that, again, like the judgments that we get are maybe, too broad. Like, for example, I remember when I did this work on negative polarity items and, the processing of ill-formedness, negative polarity items are words like any. And what is the kind of ill-formedness we get when we say, yesterday I saw any friend, which is ungrammatical.
That's right.
So what is the status of that? Is it like the grammar doesn't generate it? Is it a lexical anomaly that you mentioned earlier, like the green ideas, the colorless green ideas sleep furiously? And we did get, a particular pattern. We called it N400. It was a negativity at 400 milliseconds. And but that you observe that particular effect with a number of other like types of, like, sometimes syntactic ill-formedness, sometimes lexical anomalies, sometimes general like confusion about the signal. So it wasn't entirely clear what that would tell us about the status of any or that sentence. So I think some of the magic of that neuroimaging kind of, is watered down nowadays, because it doesn't give us very fine-grained judgments. It doesn't allow fine-grained judgments about the types of effects we observe. But general experimental methods are still very important. And we do, when we study bilingualism, for example, we do view certain differences, in the brain of bilinguals as opposed to the brain of non-bilinguals. And they are very important techniques. But, they provide us answers to different kinds of questions. And for those kinds of questions, they can provide reliable answers. They are very much, they're very valuable, I would say. Yeah. But we still have a lot of, like in psycholinguistics, we still have a lot of behavioral tasks that that take place, like truth value judgment tasks, Likert scale ratings, reaction times tasks, even questionnaires that are very important. And of course, we also have, we didn't talk about this, a lot of these kinds of behavioral tasks in sociolinguistics nowadays.
Right.
So sociolinguistics is emerging as a big new field with these behavioral quantitative approaches, how people sound, how people perceive, the speech of others. There has been a lot of I think, good and important work when we look at sociolinguistics nowadays. It's done in a very systematic way, and in a way that, aligns it with experimental methods that we observe in other areas that are more traditionally experimental. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of fields, a lot of methods. Yeah.
But my question actually was a big one, I realized, in terms of its scope. So, yes.
Yeah. And I think it touches upon the very topic that we're discussing, like what are the current methods? And these are definitely the current methods. And again, when we talk about, and we didn't even mention like the computational methods, like psycholinguistics, for example, does use computer models to simulate language processing. And these models can test hypotheses that we have about how language works, and how it can be used to make predictions about human behavior. And there's a lot of research happening there. Natural language processing, for example, which uses these computational methods and does work with corpora, they do make certain predictions. Some predictions are borne out, some predictions are not borne out, but linguistic methodology, as we see it now, is certainly, very much broader than, what we thought of it 100 years ago.
Right.
And there is, I think, sometimes some of my colleagues, and I think that's a very good question, feel, maybe linguistics then, as we understand it, is kind of, threatened or diluted. Like if linguistic analysis is so many different methodologies, and if these methodologies concern so many other adjacent fields, psychology, neuroimaging, computer science, you know, other like anthropology, like then what is left of linguistics? You know,
Right.
what is linguistics proper? Can we talk about linguistics proper? Or maybe, you know, or is that a question that we should be asking at all? Maybe there is no linguistics proper. You know, I mean, I don't want to go into that. I actually do want to
Indeed.
think that there is linguistics proper.
Indeed.
And because if we dilute too much, you know, we do have a sense of, you know, what is your field then? You know, if linguistics is a branch of mathematics and a branch of computer science and a branch of psychology and a branch of anthropology, okay, what is left of it? So these are important questions that, you know, students, when they come in, they, you know, they are confronted with that,
Right.
because
Indeed.
yeah,
Indeed.
when they are taught in the curriculum, they are being taught all these classes. They are taught classical, what we call theoretical linguistics. I still believe in this. And
Right.
I think it is a very important branch. And if we are to determine what is linguistics proper, although I don't like that terminology, that would be, you know, the heart of linguistic analysis, which is
Right.
the one that produces theory, which
Right.
is theoretical linguistics, where we
Right.
have phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. These are still there, and they allow us for linguistic theorizing
Right.
that makes predictions.
Right.
It's just that the way we get our data, so that's another way of seeing this, is with various methods now. It's not just our own intuition
Right.
and asking ourselves, what do I think about this sentence? Or
Right.
asking our informants, but you know, you can have, you know, various other methods for extracting this additional data. So there is a balance, I think. Like, it's important to show that our methods are so broad and we go all over, but there's still a core of linguistic analysis that produces theorizing, and that this is still necessary because we don't want to go, you know, all the way to Skinner. Remember those dialogues between Chomsky and Skinner in the 50s?
Yes.
And, you know,
Indeed.
you don't want to say that language is just behavior. No, there's still, you know, this thing in our heads that we're trying to describe, and it
Right.
has formal properties and it's rigorous.
Um, I have been asked by the moderators to announce that any questions from the audience can be taken as written questions in the written chat, if you please.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, we should be happy to take questions from the audience. Of course, of course.
Right. So
yeah.
please, members of the audience, please post your questions in the written chat here. And when we come to the Q&A part of our session, we'll try to address those questions. Okay? Yes.
Very good.
All right.
I'm very glad to hear that there are questions from the audience. This is fantastic. Yeah.
Indeed. So now I'd like to bring up the issue of context, which you mentioned, of course. You know, context is given high priority in semiotics, but the term, in my understanding, has to be delimited in relation to, you know, the core branches of linguistics that you mentioned. You know, that's context in the syntax of phrase structure is understood rather differently from context in phonological analysis, and it is defined still very differently in certain approaches in formal semantics, one of your major areas of work, you know, to take the example of discourse representation theory, for example. Excuse me, sorry. The kind of suffered. Yeah. So, you know, what would be your own perspective on context in these very different senses? I know this is a very big open-ended question, but I thought, given that this is a series in the social sciences, where in many disciplines context appears in different guises, it might be a question worth pondering for us as well.
Absolutely. Yes, it's definitely a very important question, and definitely relevant for us. I think, you know, I would say that all linguistics, all types of linguistic analysis, so, from phonology to syntax to semantics, is sensitive to context. And the very notion of a system, so if we think of, the basic semiotic view that language is a system of signs, like having a place in a system actually, logically entails that context matters, like where you put things and how you put things and what is preceding and what is following. So when we talk about, like morphology or phonology, it's always, the basic, the concept is distributional, like what is the preceding context, and maybe even linear, like what comes before, what comes after. And it's very important. We know that in phonology, sounds change based on, what follows. And in syntax, of course, context is distribution. And when we form constituents, we form like little small contexts. In semantics and pragmatics, context is extremely important. Already we talked about the concept of conversation. So when we talk and we exchange sentences and we produce meaning, it happens within a context that makes us go from the sentence to the utterance. So when we utter, right now we are in a conversation, we utter sentences, we convey information, we convey views, and that happens within the context where there is an understanding, there's a common ground, like a set of assumptions that we share. And it is assumptions about linguistics, assumptions about how social science works. And we also know that, words have meaning based to context, like basic things, like pronouns or indexes, things like I, you, here, there, like it's raining here. Here for me is Chicago, here for you is Delhi. So we know that the context is very, even if I cite a sentence like, he left yesterday, like we don't even literally know the meaning of the sentence, he left yesterday, unless we know in the context, what does he refer to, what kind of entity in the domain. So basic knowledge of meaning requires that we fix these contextual parameters always, which require the context. And of course, the broader context of a conversation always produces additional dimensions of meaning. He's rich but generous. We get that implicature that rich people are not generous. And when we say I ate some of the cookies, we get the implicature I didn't eat all of them, although that can be canceled. So the concept of implicature that runs very deep in our pragmatic analysis, especially, is very much requires the context to be made sense of. And so we definitely need the context. And I think as we, in semantics and pragmatics and philosophy of language, sometimes when we think of gradable adjectives like, John is rich, even that requires a context to be interpreted. What does it mean to be rich? Like if he's a student, having an income of $40,000 is rich for a student, but not rich for a guy that has a family or that, needs to work and, support 4 or 5 household members, and not rich for a millionaire, which, like, if you are a millionaire or a billionaire, you need to have a much higher income. So being rich and any kind of gradable adjective is context sensitive because we need to know what kind of equivalence class are we comparing it to. So language is very sensitive to context, different types of analysis. And I think right now also, like in when we talk about sociolinguistics, context plays an even more important role. People try to capture other parameters. Sometimes people talk about social meaning and the kinds of stereotypes that go into the discussion of meaning. Other and things like social class, maybe gender stereotypes, these race-based stereotypes, these all play like important roles of into how we interpret utterances. I think other important aspects of meaning that came through the study of gesture and sign is come from this other area of linguistics that we call it super linguistics. I don't know if you're familiar with the term. Yeah, so super linguistics studies gesture and all these other external to sound elements of the linguistic utterance. So as I'm gesturing right now, and I'm like very gestury, I gesture a lot. That's why I'm interested in the topic too. But apart from the body gesture, we also use like facial expressions, which provide additional context. Imagine speech without these additional things. And of course, things such as emojis, for example. People do study emojis a lot as part of like non-verbal gestures nowadays. They are big in the study of in super linguistics. They are like gestural. People think that they have this gestural, and the whole concept of gesture provides context in like trying to interpret utterances. So these are all like our view of the linguistic sign now, I think, is very much, unless we do just, syntax and you are just looking at pure structures, is very rich. It's not just what we say, it's how we say it, it's the intonation we use, it's the hands we use, the eyes, additional features. And these are parts of the context that can feed into the truth conditional meaning. And so I think context has become highly indispensable in some of the core aspects of how we convey meaning with language.
Well, some of this figured in the workshop, the wonderful workshop on gesture, signs, and dance that we did.
Yes.
At the Chicago Delhi Center. And about 5
that
years
was part of that.
Yes, 5 years ago. So yes, and yes, where in fact context figured prominently. And in this connection, I would like to hark back to Chicago psycholinguist David McNeil's work on gesture.
Absolutely,
was
Chicago pioneered the study of gesture, and at the Center for Gesture, Sign, and Language, we do study these extra, embodied cognition, this idea that, language and everything that we use is accompanied by these gestural elements that are important part of the very signal. So this is something that Chicago has a long tradition in. We foster that tradition. And indeed, that's also a good area of collaboration with the center in Delhi. That's why we were very interested in the dance, the Indian dance, and dance in general as a core. I mean, dance portrays meaning. It is through the body. And that type of meaning is, is an important aspect of what we want to study under sign. I mean, it has a grammar and a logic in it, and it is definitely a system of communication that we want to be able to understand with the methods that we have. Yeah, it's no longer external, like the body generally, and how we produce meaning with the body is a very important aspect of context that is brought into the sign. Yeah. So
indeed. Okay. I think we should start thinking of winding up this discussion, the dialogic part of our session. But the thing is, there are so many issues and so many questions that one could continue the conversation further on. But I think I just want to mention a couple of things. One is that again, this is a big evolving issue. The relationship of AI to methods in linguistics, which is there is a certain circularity or paradox to this notion of AI in use in linguistics, because AI itself was benefited by the development of large language models, to which a lot of linguists and computational linguists contributed very significantly. This is not known, well known, perhaps to people in other disciplinary fields. So therefore, AI has this kind of complex equation with linguistics. What is your take on this?
Right, this is a very contemporary question, absolutely. Large language models have been very like at the center of many of us, like the way we think about, again, extracting data. So like, of course, the large language models like ChatGPT, Google's Bard, or Microsoft's Sydney, like various models that have been produced, they are large-scale language models. They produce text, they recognize patterns in the text, and they can, produce like mini grammars, or they can mimic in a way the way a human understands or perceives language or even writes. We know that a lot of students actually, use ChatGPT to write papers, or at least to write drafts of papers, and that is kind of like a general, maybe an aside question about, how we evaluate. I think that has changed a little bit the nature of evaluation and what we think is genuine thought that humans produce. So I think that may be a kind of like a double-edged sword, a good and bad, like it can help. We can view LLMs as tools in the sense that, they can help you structure, your thought, or start up with something basic and then continue. And we can also view them as, oh my God, they're replacing thought, and they, students can write full papers and we don't know what these are about. As a methodology in linguistics, now a lot of, I think the main area where LLMs are used are in natural language processing, when we start looking at, how do they extract the types of data we're interested in. And as I mentioned earlier, I have one student who works on Reddit, and he looks at fact-based Reddits. And, Reddit is this website where you have like certain questions and people answer and people follow up. So it's very interesting. It's very conversational. So we can see and extract data in a very naturalistic almost way, although it's a written corpus. And so he looks at the fact-based and opinion-based, where we have more subjective utterances. And the job he can do by manually going through these and encoding them produces certain reliable ways of distinguishing. So, for example, he can very reliably distinguish between utterances that have subjective elements in it, like, I like this very much, or that movie was terrific, subjective adjectives, as opposed to more objective things that describe how the earth functions, and more like scientific related discourses. Now, when he feeds the LLM with the same corpora, and that's like what he currently observes, is, the distinction is at random. So he doesn't get the patterns that he gets with, his own manual distinction. Very different picture that he gets. So as a tool, then it's not reliable. It's not as reliable, at least in the current form, as, his actual own work and understanding and judgment, when sometimes data are unclear. Are we dealing with subjective evaluation? Are we dealing with a fact-based statement? What are the criteria? Like, the human judgment is irreplaceable when it comes to those. So that by itself, I think it's a valuable argument. There have been criticism of LLMs. I've written a paper with my co-author Alda Mari on this as well. But Emily Bender at the University of Washington, there are people from the computational community where they do observe that the LLMs, for example, they are a system that manipulates forms. So they do look at the data as a set of like forms, but they don't have the concept of meaning that we have, because, as I said at the beginning, our concept of meaning is very veridical. It looks at the world. Like any understanding of meaning that we have, understand what it means to be a flower. It's because I have seen flowers, and because, if someone tells me, the flower is blooming, the flowers are blooming in the yard, I can actually know what that means, not just by knowing what it would mean by knowing the meaning of flower, bloom, and in the yard, but also by looking at the world and being able to say, are they blooming or not? So that is ultimately like that referentiality to the world that the LLMs lack. So it's very hard to distinguish, true information from untrue information. And for those of us working in semantics and pragmatics and who care about truth, falsity, information, misinformation, those things, yeah, the LLM is still very far from being able to distinguish. And so that's why, if you feed it funny stuff, it will give you funny stuff back.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Okay.
I think that the question is the bigger question that people also ask philosophers, mainly like John Searle, back in the 70s and in the 80s, about the promise of artificial intelligence. We apply the Turing tests, remember the Chinese language?
Chinese room experiment, yes.
Very similar. I'm in the room, I manipulate the signs, I have a system that allows me to translate, from Chinese letters to particular English words. Does that mean I know Chinese? No, it doesn't. Knowledge of language involves something else. And so, when we raise the questions about the LLMs and what they know, can they help us? I think we're better with remember back in the old days, we talked about the strong AI hypothesis and the weak AI. The strong AI is the one that, John Searle and the rest were against, that the AI mimics the way the human mind works. I think we can safely say no. But as a tool, that's the weak AI hypothesis. As a tool, these things can give us a good idea of, how certain processes of learning or inferencing can be modeled.
Right.
And in that sense, I think they can be useful. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to just conclude the dialogic or conversational part of this by mentioning one aspect of my experience of being trained as a linguist at the University of Chicago, which is that while the methods in linguistic research and analysis may seem rather dauntingly formal and rigorous and also demanding, of course.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there was a lot of fun and joy that we were we were exposed to, that we imbibed as a part of learning to become good linguists, so to speak, where it wasn't only dry, serious stuff that we were engaging with, but instead, because we were dealing with something as many splendored as language, we were we were constantly sort of having fun with playing around with sentences, meanings, words, sounds,
Absolutely.
So I would like to put this on the table in regard to methods in linguistics in a non-serious vein, that, for example, my late professor and advisor, Jim Macaulay, would explain how theories are accountable to data by producing a sort of very garden variety statement, such as every theory has to pay its due rent, and terms of that sort, and expressions of that sort, that that brought a certain lightness into the methods of doing linguistics, which I certainly came to enjoy and appreciate a great deal.
Absolutely. I'm very glad you brought that aspect. Indeed, like it has to be fun and it has to be enjoyable. And I think I'm glad you brought on that fun aspect. Maybe sometimes we say, oh my God, there's all these, different approaches and methodologies, or, certain aspects can be very formal but I think it is quite enjoyable. And so we want to encourage, people to do linguistics but it is also in the nature of our signs that are very complex. They're not like unidimensional. It's not just sound. It's not just the words. It's sentences and it's in a conversation. So we go, to larger units. And so we have to go to like funder analysis. But I think ultimately what we do is we uncover the mystery of language. And as Jim Macaulay said, every theory has to pay the rent because, every theory is good. It describes certain things. Then, the set of pool of data becomes bigger. We need to move to a better analysis. We need to update. And I think that's the excitement of it.
Right.
It's not a static discipline. It's a very rich discipline. And indeed, we uncover the mystery of language. I think in every other field, like if you work in physics, for example, and you say you uncover the mysteries of the universe, of course it's going to be complex. And they are indeed different methods in here and there. And, the scale of questions and data that you're asking in different areas of physics are, of course, like vastly different. So why would language is a tiny thing, and because we all command it as humans, we can all speak. And we don't need to be linguists to write well or to appreciate good writing and to enjoy, a nice joke or a nice play or a nice piece of literature. We think that, well, there's nothing to language. It's so simple and we all enjoy it without knowing the mysteries of it. But I think knowing the mysteries of it is like opening up to a universe which is, not as vast as the universe that's studied by astronomers and physicians, but it's still, a quite multidimensional universe.
Right.
And that's what makes the methods exciting and the result exciting and the communication between the various disciplines exciting.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, there are a couple of questions that have come up since the questions are both kind of a similar nature, I think, and in the interest of time, since we are going to run out of time, I would suggest, would I just read both the questions and then have you respond to the questions?
Okay.
Or is that all right? There are two questions.
Yes.
Okay. One is from someone named Porikshita Kakoti. Porikshita Kakoti. How can researchers methodologically reconcile the qualitative context-driven methods of the ethnography of communication with the more quantitative or formalist approaches of structural linguistics? Is such integration welcome through mixed method designs or analytic strategies? So this is one question. The next question, that's actually a sort of cluster of questions, is from Sonu Singh, who asks, is language truly a formal system, or it's our general cognitive processes which give form to other communication systems? Shapes our view of language as a formal system. And if it is a formal system, universal to all, then which one formal rule is universal to all human linguistic systems, and how to remove the multiple variables affecting the humanities research, as we can't control these variables at once, as done in labs in other scientific research?
Wow, that's a very big question. These are two big questions. Maybe
Right.
start by answering, yeah, or are there any other related like class?
No, these are the three, actually it's three questions that have come in.
Okay.
The first one was about how can researchers methodologically reconcile the qualitative and the more quantitative formalist approaches? of structural
Okay.
difference. That's the
All
first.
right. I get that. I mean, these are all very, very well thought questions, and I thank the audience for these. The first one, I would say that the formalist approach, as we kind of alluded to in the discussion, the formalist approaches are certainly so. There's always linguistic theory. So when we talk about theorizing, which is very much like building theories in physics or in chemistry, we want to be able to produce statements or rules that will have predictive power. Okay, so if I say something like, Hindi has an SOV basic word order, subject, object, verb, whereas Greek has a subject, verb, or object, word order. Like I should be able to, these statements should be general enough to be able to predict, the majority of sentences that are produced under normal circumstances in those languages, with an accuracy of, I don't know, 95%. And I think so, and that requires rigor. So it requires looking at the data, making predictions, what happens when we find exceptional word orders, and describing those in a principled, rigorous, and formal manners, build the syntactic trees, show why these are like the way they are. Likewise, in semantics, if I say something like every boy left, that again has to describe a situation in which every member of the set boy that I am considering is, left, and there's no exception to that. And that's part of what it means to be every. If I say most, it's going to be, if I have 10 boys in my domain, maybe 7 or 8 left, but not 2. And that is, again, predictable by what it means to know the meaning of every and most. And that would be a universal quantifier with its logic, or something, a proportional quantifier with most, with its logic. And so we have to assume that these will be rigorous and that there is a kind of, mathematical structure that maps onto our brains when we, or onto our linguistic faculty, I should say, when we know the meaning of a word like every, we know that. We know that. And so that is both, I would say, quantifiable and qualifiable, in the sense that now if I formulate a theory without any experiment that says, okay, every denotes a relation between two sets such that the one set is included in the other, which is the standard formal way we analyze every, then my prediction is that every experiment that I'm going to run with every will not, like if a competent speaker of a language, of the English language that has the word every, would not produce a sentence, every student left being good, if I show them a picture where 2 students didn't leave and stayed in the classroom. And so that is a good way of seeing like the quantitative and the qualitative going together. And I think the more accuracy our theories have through the formalism that we use to describe them and formulate them, the better the predictions will be when we run the experiments to see, what we observe. And of course, what I described now is a very clear-cut case. Not always, I mean, it's not always that we get clear-cut cases, but in most, and sometimes the kind of messiness that we find in the data tell us that, well, the theory needs to change. Maybe, I mean, I wouldn't predict that the word every would ever have a different meaning. But, there are other cases, what do we mean by some? What do we mean by few? If we just look at quantifiers, it's not always, people would disagree. Or what's the difference between some and several? It's not exactly obvious. And, there we would get more messy data. But that again describes the fact that, some data or some expressions are more accurate, some others are less accurate. There's always some kind of value judgment in certain areas. And, that's the aspect of meaning that we call subjective sometimes, and it's part of that. What I hope that I answered the question to some satisfactory degree. And what were the other questions that we had?
Okay, well, there is one more that came in, but okay. One is language truly a formal system, or is it our general cognitive processes? Which,
Oh, yes, yes. This is very much, so as we said, it's many other things. So language is, we go for a disjunctive, for a conjunctive. It is a formal system. Definitely the part of language that we think of as grammar, we do want to think of it as a formal system. And it's not just a mere desire. I mean, we see that by treating it as a formal system, okay, we are able to explain a lot of facts about it. We are able to explain certain facts about grammar. And I remember that a question was related to this other question of universals. So knowing certain things about grammar, we have certain universals about grammar. So for example, we know that if you are a verb, so, we have what we think of as parts of speech, like, these are these universal categories that we think every human language has. Verb, predicate, maybe not the difference between noun and adjective, but something that we call, predicate in that sense. Quantifiers, maybe not all the range that we observe, languages differ vastly, but we know that there are these categories. Determiners, maybe. And we also know that, for example, if we have a verb, that verb will relate naturally to, so it will come with maybe, person or number or, first person, second person, third person, even if these are not expressed overtly, or they can be expressed in various forms. They can be pronouns, they can be suffixes, they can be prefixes, infixes, but that's kind of like normal with a verb, but we're not going to find a verb with, say, a determiner, like, every go.
right.
Okay. In order to make every go, you have to kind of nominalize the verb. You have to make it like a noun. So we know that nouns and determiners go together. Verbs and persons go together. I go, you go, she goes. These are certain generalizations that we know hold, as far as I know, universally about language.
Right.
And so we are able to formulate universals. That doesn't mean that every language, realizes everything that we can think of as universal, or that we know that there is a closed set of universals, although Greenberg wrote, famously about universals. And there is, we want to know maybe a set of finite categories that are universal, or finite rules or predictable patterns that we expect to find in languages, such that, if a system exhibits patterns outside those universals, it's not language. So I think that the universal, we want to be able as linguists to describe what system, counts as language and what system does not. And, there are systems of communication that are not language, like, animal communication systems, traffic lights, other ways of communicating, like gestural systems, are not linguistic, they're extra linguistic. But, human language, we want to say that it has certain properties that, a system is a human language, and it's not merely reduced to behaviors. Okay, like there is a certain aspect of language that is behavior. Like when we speak, we, produce behavior, but when we think, we don't. So there is a lot of language when we write or we develop arguments and we write our books and our papers, like it's not behavior. Like thinking in language is like pure thought. It's not.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. There's one last question. Again, it's too big to answer, but I'll just put it on record. Ankoni Chakraborty has asked, in what ways can AI methodologies be rigorously applied within linguistic research to advance English language learning and teaching? It's a big question.
Oh, yeah. This is more, I'll take it to be more a practical question. I think AI can help very much in language teaching generally. because you can produce good, and I think there is some research in more applied areas of linguistics. We didn't talk about applied linguistics very much, so this brings it in. So, you know, you can generate good questions and quizzes and tests with large set of corpora. You know, you can you might want to train your students in more literary context, so you can look at those vocabularies. As a teacher of language, you can benefit a lot from LLMs and generally, like, you know, accessing these pattern generating methodologies, because they can give you a lot of material for teaching, which can be very useful, and it can certainly facilitate language learning and language teaching. The danger always is that the students can also find solutions to the puzzles and problems that you put, because they can feed the LLM and they can find the answers. That is a little bit disappointing. So it does make our work of, you know, making students genuinely think of their own answers and like going through the process of discovery a little, you know,
Challenging.
hard.
Challenging.
Yeah.
Very challenging.
They should, that is something that we lose, I think. But, you know, hopefully we'll find ways. I'm very optimistic always. We can find ways to compromise, to extract the good that these methods give us, and, you know, balance the potential challenges that they confront us with. Yeah.
All right. So this brings us to the end of our session. Thank you very much, Anastasia, for taking the trouble so early in the morning at your end, you know, amidst
It was a pleasure. It was a very happy way to wake up to, a very happy reason to wake up to.
Real pleasure to engage with.
Yeah, it was.
And
Such a great interlocutor, dear Tista. It was fantastic. I mean, you asked the right kinds of questions. A fellow linguist. We're in very neighboring, I mean, similar areas: semantics, pragmatics. So we're thinking similarly. We had a good discussion. I wanted to thank Lenny, you know, and Jubakshi for again making this possible.
Indeed.
The University of Chicago Center in Delhi is a great forum to be able to foster these collaborations, and technology allows us now to like be far away, but nevertheless converse in a meaningful way and bring people into the conversation. And, you know, hopefully, I hope that our audience, you know, got something useful to think about and understand, and perhaps even motivate people to do linguistics. We didn't want to give a messy impression of, you know, how much methodology there is and differences. These are, it's also fun to navigate through these different methods, and it makes, you know, the mystery of uncovering language even more magical, I would say. I still have that enthusiasm that I had when I started, and I think this is testimony to, you know, how good the field is and how, you know, the different methodologies only make it richer. Yeah.
So I wanted
Thank
to
you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to formally thank Professor Anastasia and Professor Tista for this wonderful session. I think it was academically very, very rich, yet engaging. So thank you for bringing out the fun part of it, making it contextual and helping all of us to relate to our work. So thank you for facilitating this. I know it's early for you and it's late for Tista, but still we could come together to do this session.
Indeed.
Thank you. And I want to thank the participants for joining the session, asking questions. And I want to encourage all of you to stay in touch with the center, visit the website, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on our social media pages to know more about what the center does. The center, as Jubakshi mentioned, is a hub for a lot of interesting academic discussions. And this is just one of the things that we are doing. There are many other things, and I look forward to staying in touch with everyone. Thank you, Tista. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Great work.
Lenny. Thank you, Jubakshi. Really
wonderful. Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Thank
See
you.
you again soon. Absolutely.
Yes, we'll
Yeah,
be in
keep
touch.
up the good work at the center in Delhi. I mean, I've been there, I visited, I know how important and how dynamic it is. I'm very glad to be part of this series. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay,
Okay,
bye.
great.
You have a
Bye.
good rest of the day. Please
Yes,
continue. Thank
Good
you.
it's a
evening
great
to you.
start of the week for me too.
Indeed.
Yes, it's
Please
like,
have a
it
nice
was the
Yes,
perfect way
absolutely.
to start it. Yeah,
Please
That's
have a
very
wonderful.
wonderful
energized.
Thank
And
you.
you ladies have a nice